Well, I don't have to say hardly anything here in Los Angeles about Marianne Williamson. I'll just tell you how I met Marianne. I don't know, 20 years ago, who knows, whenever. She was talking at, longer than that, she says. She was talking at the church on 18th in Arizona. And I just went, she wasn't famous then, but she was talking a lot. And I just was blown away. I could not believe anybody could talk that well in all different kinds of ways that we don't have time for me to tell you. But I wrote her a letter. I said, oh, good, wonderful. She called me up. She said, it's the best letter I ever got. So, my friend Marianne Williamson.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Suzanne, for bringing us all together today. This is not the first time in history that humanity has had a new story. We have new stories all the time. It makes sense that the 21st century mind is different than the 20th century mind. For that matter, the 20th century mind was different than the 19th century mind. And it helps us to have historical perspective, because when we do, we recognize that the new story is never appreciated by the old. As a matter of fact, societies never move forward because the status quo wakes up one day, because the majority wakes up one day and says, oh, let's do things differently. The majority didn't wake up one day and go, oh, let's free the slaves. The majority didn't wake up one day and say, why don't we give women the right to vote? For that matter, the founding of this country was done at a time when then the majority of American citizens, the colonists at that time, actually were themselves still royalists. So it was always thus that society moves forward because a relatively small group of people, considered outrageous, radical, kooky people by the status quo of their time, have a better idea. And when we were children, we learned about evolution. We learned about how when a species is moving in a direction that is maladaptive for its survival, that a mutation occurs. And I remember as a child always asking where the mutation came from. The mutation is never the majority. The mutation is just one or two, some small number of members of the species. But because the mutation represents a set of behavioral patterns that are adaptive for the survival of the species, then as we were taught as kids, the entire species moves in that direction. And we have two choices. The species either moves in that better adapted for survival, more sustainable direction, or the species will die. And as has been said in some very eloquent ways here today, we are moving as a species in very maladaptive ways, ways that are in fact not sustainable. Now, a lot of people in the status quo would say that a lot of what we're talking about, a more spiritual orientation, a sense of reverence towards nature, a sense of brotherhood and justice and love, there are many people who represent the more status quo paradigm, as you would call it in this room, or this dome, that this viewpoint is naive. But what we need to remember, at least I contend, and I think all of us who are joined in this conversation here would contend, that those who believe that we can continue as we are, that we can continue to treat the earth with the lack of reverence that we now display, that we can continue to treat each other in very broad ways in terms of the way we organize society, making economic rather than humanitarian values our bottom line, that we can continue to play with the maturity of an 8-year-old with nuclear bombs, that we can continue to problem solve with brute force as our primary problem solving conflict resolution modality. Anybody who thinks that we can continue to survive and thrive as a species for another 200 years if in fact we do not change that paradigm, they are naive. Now, what do we need? Do we need to just continue talking about it? Are we really believing that enough of us to just sit around and talk, and that enough morphic field, enough resonance will come about that of itself will make the tipping point occur? I would argue not. They didn't just talk about abolition, and they didn't just talk about women's suffrage either. At a certain point, you cannot change the world over white wine and brie. You know, every time that there has been a terrible act of terrorism, whether it's been domestic terrorism or international terrorism, every time whoever the president of the United States was at that time, they've always said, it seems to me, the same thing, that this cowardly act will not be tolerated. They always use that word cowardly. And every time that they say that this cowardly act will not be tolerated, I kind of tilt my head. Unconscionable, I'll certainly go with that. Horrifying, even evil, I will go with that. But cowardly, I am not so sure. The truth of the matter is that hatred has a perverse kind of courage. None of us have ever heard about a kind of, sort of, casual, when it's convenient, committed terrorist. Quite the opposite. Terrorists of whatever stripe have proven in often horrifying ways that they are very serious and they are very convicted. And they have practiced and they work it and they are absolutely committed to do whatever it takes to effectuate their worldview. Now, I think those of us here would all agree that the only thing that can triumph over fear is love. But what about those of us who love? Are we as convicted as terrorists are behind their hate? I don't believe so at this time. I think that a lot of us, and I can say this knowing that I myself, this has been true of me as much as of anyone else, kind of, sort of, sometimes when it's convenient, committed to love. And so the problem in the world is not that more people hate than love. The problem with the world is that those who hate with conviction. You see, the social axis of our time is not horizontal. The social axis of our time is vertical. It's not about a whole bunch of people kind of sort of believing something new. It's about however many people who are willing to think it deep and are willing to have a conviction and a commitment behind it, even to the point of what might appear to be a level of sacrifice that was not there before. Terrorists are willing to sacrifice. Abolitionists were willing to sacrifice. Women suffragettes were willing to sacrifice. And those of us who are so into all this new paradigm thinking, all into this love and justice and brotherhood, but still want to do it in these proverbial comfort zones, this is the point at which you want to bring out a model, you want to bring out a feminine model. I'll tell you what a feminine model is. We've been pregnant for a long time. It's labor. We need to start pushing. Many people have said that this is a kairos moment. But kairos is an interesting concept that, of course, comes from the ancient Greek. And it says, of course, that one world is dying. That's why we see this as a kairos moment. And that kairos philosophy says that a new world is possible. We've gone along with that. But kairos moment, that philosophical concept does not say that the new world is inevitable. It says the old world is dying, a new world is possible, and a new world will be brought forth if people, human beings, do what it takes to be the vessels and to be the conduits through which the new world can emerge. I believe that the world is self-organizing. If you look at the way an embryo turns into a baby, if you look at the way an acorn turns into an oak tree, if you look at the way a bud turns into a blossom, how is it that an egg and a sperm come together and then all this incredible natural entelechy occurs by which cells divide and brains get made and lungs and hearts and hands and feet? What is that programming inside an acorn that knows how to turn into an oak tree? Well, that patterning of a self-organizing universe from a philosophical and spiritual perspective is an imprint on everything. That natural entelechy is not only within every cell of nature. We, each and every one of us, as a human being, we are a cell in the greater possibility. And what is cancer if not a cell that has lost its natural entelechy? It has gone insane. It has separated itself from the pattern by which it supports the larger functioning of the whole, and instead says, I don't want to just support the spleen. I want to go off and do my own thing and build my own kingdom and bring other sick cells along with me. That's called the malignancy. And what is happening on the planet today is that the consciousness of today is a kind of spiritual malignancy. We've all gone off and done our own thing, and we are course correcting now in a way that, by the way, this is not the first time in history. And when the Dalai Lama said, in order to save the world, we must have a plan, but no plan will work unless we meditate. To me, he is speaking to the fact that each and every one of us are cells in this intentional movement of the universe. The universe is intentional. The embryo, there is the intention to become a baby, the intention of the acorn, the intention of the bud. But the difference between you and me and the acorn, and you and me and the embryo, and you and me and the bud, is that we can say no. We can say, I don't want to. But there is now a yearning among all of us. We want to be part of this great collaborative venture. But each and every one of us, I believe, needs to find our own natural entelechy now. What are you supposed to do to contribute to this great collaborative venture? None of my business. God tells you what to do with your life. What are you supposed to do in order to contribute your life and your intelligence and your resources to this great co-collaborative venture of self-correction on the planet and growth and evolutionary movement forward of the human race? I can't know. God will not give me instructions for your life. And so it is that each and every one of us are learning through prayer, through meditation, through mindfulness, through whatever our process is. What would you have me do? Where would you have me go? Use me. That is the impulse of the moment. But the only thing I want to leave you with is that it might not always be easy. And sometimes the answers we get when we ask, what would you have me do, might even seem startling because of the things that Russell was saying, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And so the only thing I think that I feel in my heart to wrap all this up with is enough of us know now that the era of data collection is over. Thank you for this beautiful day of articulating what by now we all already know. We didn't come here today to learn something that we don't already know. We gather in groups now because we need to intensify the knowledge that we all by now already have. We don't come to gatherings like this to learn something new. We learn to access more deeply, more vertically, what by now we do already do. And then we leave here, and that's when the work is really happening. After we have come here for the battery charge and we go out there. And this is the time to simply say, you go. I know you can do it. And to each and every one of us, knowing that like the abolitionists and like the suffragettes and like anybody else who has brought forth on this earth something more beautiful than was there before, for each of us to say to each other, God bless you and good luck. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, thank you. Thank you, Kate. Oh, thank you.